that the experiences, if you regress to birth, the experiences come in 4 patterns. I call them perinatal matrices, basic perinatal matrices. The first perinatal matrix relates to the situation of the fetus still in the womb before the onset of the delivery. This could be pregnancy, which is the result of planning, of the parents' loving expectation. The mother is physically healthy, is in emotionally good condition. Reliving of that kind of state would be a very ecstatic experience. Now, this doesn't necessarily happen. There are pregnancies which are a result of rape, of a one-night stand when both parents were drunk, where the marriage was broken, the mother is abused, physically and emotionally unhealthy. The pregnancy could be so unwelcome that there are attempts at abortion. Another possibility, the mother is Rh negative, the father is Rh positive, so that from the beginning, the fetus is being attacked, immunologically treated as an invader. Come 9 months plus minus, this is the onset of the delivery. First hormonal changes, which are then translated into mechanical contractions of the uterus. Each contraction compresses the arteries and interrupts placentary circulation between the mother and the child, which means no supply of oxygen, no nourishment coming in, and there's no removal of metabolic products. There's no resolution for it because the cervix is not open, just contractions of the uterus in a closed system. Now, with each contraction, the cervix is being pulled over the head, it's dilating. When it reaches the necessary size, then it's the transition to the third matrix. The contractions continue with all the consequences, but the cervix is now open, so there is this laborious propulsion through the birth canal. Now there are tremendous pressures here. Suffocation and the pain generate powerful energy, which has all the qualities of sexual energy. Our first encounter with sexual energy, we were inflicting pain on another organism was inflicting pain on us. We couldn't breathe. There were a lot of pressures and fear. This kind of experience then can become the basis of the development of various sexual dysfunctions, deviations, aberrations, perversions. And then we have the completion of the delivery, head first or feet first, and then the umbilical cord is cut. From then on, the child exists as an anatomically independent individual, still biologically, emotionally dependent, of course.
The matrices begin with unity, transition to hell with no escape, then to purgatory with the end in sight, where you are the victim and the perpetrator and the observer, and finally culminate in freedom and a newfound sense of connection. As Stan finished, I remembered the rebirthing workshop I'd taken at Rajneeshpuram back in the 80s. I felt like I was dropping into a deep pit that grew more painful as I descended. Just when I thought I was going to die, I burst through into an ocean of love and light. Joseph Campbell is best known for his work in comparing mythologies and religions from cultures around the world. He met Stan in the late 60s at a conference in New York City. When Campbell heard Stan's theory on the 4 perinatal matrices, he instantly solved a mystery that had intrigued him for years. He couldn't understand how cultures from diverse geographical locations could share the same death-rebirth themes. He called it a monomyth. But when he saw Stan's presentation, he understood that these cultures were reliving the experience of their own births. The perinatal matrices, especially the 3rd moving into the 4th, served as the threshold for the hero's journey. The rites of passage that these cultures developed allowed their initiates to access unconscious birth memories, face their fear of death, and finally, free themselves from a deep maternal dependency.
Birth itself is not only a rite of passage, but is perhaps the universal rite of passage that we all go through. Perhaps it's through that experience that we come into the world knowing deeply that if we are to succeed in the ongoing actualization of our potentials, whatever they are as individuals, throughout the life cycle for however long we live, we will need to undergo repeatedly similar rites of passage.
Holotropic breathwork is an experiential approach to self-exploration, to therapy, which uses very, very simple means. It uses faster breathing, it uses powerful evocative music, and also a certain kind of body work when it's indicated.
So each individual will choose a partner. One of those people does the breathing, and the other person sits with him or her, and then they switch roles so that everybody gets a chance to participate both as a breather and as what we call a sitter.
And we also combine it with what we call mandala drawings. And after the session, they try to communicate what happened to them in a kind of graphic way.
The second day of the conference was the breathwork. I couldn't believe how anxious I felt. Towards the end of the 3 hours, I sat up, thinking that it was over. It had been a pleasant experience, and I tried to tell the facilitator that I was fine, that she could take care of the next person. But she wouldn't leave. The minutes stretched on, when suddenly a wave of sadness rolled up from my belly. And that's when I understood the meaning of Stan's phrase, as long as it takes. Everyone deserves the time for the process to fully unfold. Later during the course, Stan showed slides from his Tantra presentation. It was the same theme that my teachers showed me some 20 years earlier. Suddenly I realized that on some deep level, I wasn't alone. There was something universal about what I'd experienced, and Stan held the wisdom I needed to make sense of how it all fit together. About 9 months later, I learned that Christina had died, and worried that Stan might follow her if there wasn't something to keep him engaged. When I learned about the conference honoring him, I knew I had to go.
Welcome to the Bay Area, and as Rick Tarnas has been heard to say, where new ideas meet the least resistance.
For over a half-century, Stan Grof has fully engaged and then participated in the great transformation of worldview that is taking place in our era.
He was my mentor, fellow explorer of new visions, co-presenter at many seminars, and guide in experiential therapies.
That 75 years ago, Stan and I were kind of conspiring to attack the non-ordinary states of consciousness.
When I finally overcame my qualms and moved from semi-hard drugs to psychedelics and started having LSD experiences, which were the most amazing things I'd ever had.
It was a very different...
Here were all these accomplished people, and the one thing they had in common was an experience of non-ordinary states of consciousness. I'd always imagined that people who did psychedelics remained hippies for life. And what about the mainstream news warnings of irreparable damage from using LSD? But the presenters were some of the most accomplished and insightful people I'd ever heard. Stan offered them a context that they, in turn, expanded and shared.
Stan developed these descriptions, described exactly, I mean, in detail, some of the most gruesome experiences that I had that, you know, where I was like in a medieval torture chamber being beaten to death by guys with enormous clubs to a bloody pulp. And like, I thought, well, how does this relate to my Oedipus complex or anything else for that matter?
For me personally, and many who spoke and many who are in this room, just going near Stan changes your life.
During the event, Christina was honored for her contributions as well. She introduced Stan to Muktananda, contributed to the development of holotropic breathwork, and together they created an approach to spiritual emergence when suppressed memories and emotions spontaneously rise to the surface. Their technique helped people avoid hospitalization and misdiagnosis. Christina also shared her struggle with Kundalini awakening and alcoholism, which helped others find resolution with their challenges. And I could more than relate to her feelings of insecurity around so many accomplished academics and professionals. The next day was the workshop designed to support the Grof Foundation. I'll never forget how frightened I felt. Here I was, an outsider, among people who knew Stan and had been studying or working with him for years. But I found my courage and suggested that the best way to share Stan's research about the healing power of non-ordinary states of consciousness was to make a movie about him.
This is my favorite sculpture here. Did you see that? So it have you see like the helicopter, you have a flight, and then you have a ship, and then wheels at the bottom. So it's a protection against any kind of transportation that can be involved.